Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. And what I want to talk about today is what I experience might be some of the challenges of being a therapist and working in private practice. One of the reasons for this is, of course, for the sake of balance. I've previously talked and done a video about the great things that I think about being a therapist and also working in private practice. So as I say, this is about exploring the other part of things, which can be the challenges too. And somebody did also say to me over Christmas, is being a therapist as easy as it looks from the point of view of a career? And I thought that was an interesting thing to say. This is not somebody who's been in therapy, and I think they probably got that impression based on depictions of therapy in the media. Occasional looks into sessions where the therapist sort of calmly makes an intervention. It can make it look like that's all that really happens and that's all that's going on. So it can make it look easy, I guess, from that point of view. But I thought it would be helpful, as I say, to look at the challenges that might happen. Firstly, from the point of view of challenges within the therapeutic relationship, then moving on to the challenges of running your own therapy practice particularly, and then generally running my own business. So looking at the challenges that may exist and occur within a therapy relationship, I did start to note down what these might be, and I wrote down probably 20 within the course of 48 hours. Again, not trying to give the impression that this is some consistently stressful job at all. What we're looking at is things that may occur to the therapist, may happen during therapy, which are things that perhaps need to be thought about and made conscious, some of which can, of course, at times be anxiety-provoking and challenging. So just to give some examples, as I say, there were 20 that I wrote down. If I carried on, I'm sure I would have written down many more. And if you speak to other therapists, they will all give a different, perhaps some overlap, but also will add some different views. So there are lots of things that are happening all the time that are needed to be looked at potentially and thought about and felt and experienced within the therapy. As I say, just focusing on 5 of those here. The first one might be to hold accepting somebody entirely where they are and listening to them, hearing them, as I say, as they are, because that may be an experience that people have never had. It's often an experience that people have never had within a relationship. So how do you hold accepting, valuing where somebody is in the moment consistently, and also holding the potential for change and how things might be different? As I say, in past relationships, what might have happened with somebody is that somebody was always looking at them, hoping that they were going to be different or suggesting that they should be different. We have a tendency to look at other people, human beings, through a problem-focused lens. And what we don't want to repeat in therapy is that somebody needs to change particularly as well, because that's what I believe they should do, or what that would be helpful for them. So how do you hold, as I say, empathizing with, really hearing, really listening to somebody where they are and appreciating that and helping them to feel heard, which is some of the most powerful thing that happen in therapy, and also hold what could be different and where that change might take place. Moving on to the second one there, which is an extension of what I've just been talking about really, but that would be the point about my frame and a client's frame. What we don't want to be doing is imposing our frame onto someone else. There's often people might say, I know you can't give advice, and that's for very good reason, that any advice would come from my view of things and them, rather than, and I am not them. So, but also, how do you hold the fact that there is an amount of knowledge and knowing and experience that come with being a therapist to a number of people over a number of years? So how do you hold the knowing and the not knowing? So to listen to everybody as if it's the first time you've ever met a human being, to really listen to them and try and understand what it feels like for them, and also holding those things in your mind which you believe might be helpful for somebody. As unique as every human being is, there are some common things that cause people difficulties, and therefore there are some common ways through, and that clients will be coming to you for that as well. So again, it's this balance between knowing and not knowing. So being able to offer openness and expansiveness and listening to somebody, and also if they're looking for tools or if they're looking for a view or how you experience them, having access to that as well for them. Then the third thing, which I think can be interesting and challenging at times, is if you do notice something which a client may not be noticing themselves, but which might be, well, firstly, it might be helpful to them in relationship. Sometimes we push out of consciousness great qualities about ourselves. That's just what's happened during early experience. As I say, somebody might have been very problem focused on us, so we haven't been able to internally ground the great and the good about us. So there's that aspect of things that gets pushed, as I say, outside of consciousness, perhaps projected onto and admired in other people. And then also perhaps more difficult is those situations where we push outside of consciousness and perhaps even project onto and criticise in others those qualities that we have that might be more challenging for us or more difficult for us to accept and see in ourselves, the concept of shadow within therapy. So how do you, when do you reflect back to somebody if you do notice something that might be unhelpful for them in relationship but they don't seem to be noticing? Some people will always take the blame themselves in situations, and when we're looking at something, grounding empathy for them can be very helpful. As I say, there are also some other people who will never see their part in something, not take accountability for their part. This isn't blame, this is just accountability, responsibility, and we'll talk about other people and what they should do and shouldn't do a lot. So, as I say, how do we reflect back to people? Because we don't want to be colluding with somebody by not saying something we don't notice. We also, of course, don't want to be criticising somebody which may be setting up or continuing something that they've gone through in their past relationships. So that can be a really challenging one as well, I think. Then moving on to boundaries. Boundaries are talked about all the time now for good reason. So important in relationship, of vital importance to be able to take care of ourselves particularly, and also take care of others, looking at what those boundaries might be. As we're growing up, those boundaries get told to us, sort of enforced on us by other people. Some people have boundaries which are perhaps too rigid. They've needed to do that, and that's what they've been shown. Other people might have too fluid of boundaries. Of course, I'm very aware when I'm saying to this or to that. Again, that's my frame. But if you're looking at boundaries, as I say, within the therapy space, there are the practical boundaries. There are the boundaries of finances and payment, and when things are paid, how they're paid. There is time. So are people on time? Do people miss sessions? So important to look at there, because our boundaries, as I say, our quality of relationships outside of the therapy session and also within the therapy session are dependent on our boundaries, really. And people can sort of act out what they're thinking and how they feel behaviourally. So not paying, not attending could be for practical reasons. It could also be because they're trying to communicate something about how they feel about the therapy. So boundaries can be really important, and we always have to be keeping an eye on that as therapists. Looking as well at finances, therapists have cancellation policies. It can be very difficult for a client, if they've been coming for years and never missed a session, that if they cancel because they're ill, that the therapist will charge them. Although that's the boundary, that can be experienced by somebody as unempathetic or even cruel. And so those things can come up, certainly. And that's the kind of practical boundaries. There are also lots of more psychological boundaries. So responding to questions, for example, do you respond to questions? How do you respond to questions? So that thing about self-disclosure, when is that helpful? What's the reason for self-disclosure? Why is somebody asking? Also, if you're looking at clients and their own disclosure, sometimes we might think, well, it would be helpful for somebody to talk about that. We know as therapists often that shame dies where stories are told in safe places, and that therapy, the therapeutic relationship, is one of those potentially safe places. But somebody does need to feel safe. It's not the therapist that decides when somebody should disclose or that they should disclose. But you can see how it might be challenging throughout the therapy, knowing that if somebody were to bring that, it would be helpful and to look at it, but not wanting to take away their sense of agency in the world by suggesting or saying that they need to talk about it. Other things around boundaries: some people need to be more contained than others psychologically, some people need more space than others, and that can change throughout the session, of course. But it's important to be aware of these things and to be looking at them, to be talking in supervision about them, and of course talking about them within the therapeutic relationship where we feel like that's something that would be helpful. So there's boundaries. Then moving on to this issue of being human within the therapeutic relationship. Therapy would have started with psychoanalysis, and that was a little bit more, my understanding of it would be sort of patient doctor type situation. Actually, the patient and the doctor wouldn't even be looking at each other. I think the tendency has been more recently for things to be more relational, and that can be very helpful. You're sort of face to face, which is engaging the social part of both people's brains. And in that situation, you can really see how somebody responds in relationship. Of course, a therapeutic relationship is different to all other relationships in terms of boundaries and important ways, but you can see how somebody, the sort of dynamics that they might set up, whether they fill space, whether they need to be asked a lot of questions, whether they might set up a power dynamic, whether you feel like you need or want to take care of them, whether they might want to take care of you. All those things are very helpful, so as between two human beings. The thing also, though, to bear in mind is, as much as being human is really helpful, and to notice my own responses to things and how I might feel in relation to somebody, there's also that we don't want somebody, or I don't want to be too human in some ways. Only, I mean, from the point of view of not reactive. So outside of the room, somebody may be reactive in a particular situation to respond from anger or to respond from hurt. But in the therapeutic relationship, I personally, and other people may disagree, but I personally don't think that that's the most helpful thing for the client. And it could be rewounding and re-traumatizing for a client to experience that. Holding in mind also, though, that we are all human beings. So it can be, how do you balance your human responses and be aware of your human responses to things with somebody without responding from that place. And that can come up in a number of different situations. As I say, it could be being triggered, for example, is to notice that we might get triggered, so our anxiety or our annoyance, whatever it might be. That rarely happens with me, but occasionally. So it's important to notice it, because there might be something, it might be my own stuff, it might also be something that the client is doing in relationship, which could be being done in relationships outside of the room as well, and it might be unhelpful and disconnecting. Again, it would be my frame that would be unhelpful. But how do we communicate that without being shaming or accusatory, and realizing, of course, it's just my frame, as subjectively, as just another human being. And tears is another one that can come up. So we are with some people who are telling stories and recounting traumatizing situations sometimes. As therapists, we tend to be empathetic people, so to imagine what that felt like, which is what empathy is, can elicit those sorts of feelings in the therapist too. For a client to see their therapist tearful might be one of the most helpful things that they could possibly experience in life, might be incredibly healing for them, because they never quite felt that, were able to feel that themselves, and to have that mirrored back and reflected back to them is hugely powerful. For somebody else to see that response in their therapist, that might shut them down, because they are people who take care of other people, always have, and the whole idea of somebody else crying because of something that they've said would be very difficult and too much for them to bear, and they may not say that. So again, there's all these, around our humanness and relationship and what we communicate and how we communicate that. There are no right or wrong in situations. It's just making sure that we're conscious about things, and to the extent, of course, that things do come up, that we talk about them. And those are just some of the things, as I say, that can be helpful to be looking at, or that might come up. And they're important. You might say whether somebody gets a bit tearful or not, or if I collude with the dynamic or not for a while, that what does it really matter? Well, as a therapist, it really does matter. I take that really seriously, what happens, because often with people where their distress occurred, the reason why somebody may be anxious, depressed, experience chronic anger, feel stuck, lost, have relationship difficulties, is because of things that happened during relationship, either things that they experienced actively from somebody else, or that there may have been a lack of or a deficit of something during early experience. And when somebody comes to a therapist, they're giving relationship another chance. They're trusting another person, the therapist, to be able to co-create something with them that's going to give them a different experience, that's going to help them, it's going to add to their lives in a way that relationships may not have done in the past. So for me, the stakes are high there. It is serious, it is important, and also how do you balance that with and humour and joy in life, which can also be very helpful too to have. It can also be very connecting to laugh and to have humour around things, and that can often happen within the therapy room. So how do you balance those two things, the seriousness of this, how important it is, and also with humour? And of course, this all changes from client to client. Some people, as I say, might need to be contained more. Other people need more space. It may differ depending on what's happening in somebody's life. If they've just had a bereavement, there needs to be different dynamics and different things happening. And of course, this is the case in all relationships. In all relationships, there will be dynamics, there will be things going backwards and forwards, parent, adult, child, people going between all those things at different times, giving people space, providing advice or not, validating or invalidating feelings, empathy or not, or a lack of empathy. But as I say, the important thing here, the key thing here is that it's a conscious relationship, and I think personally I feel responsible as the therapist to be helping to create something which is a different experience for somebody, which is an experience that may not have had in the past, not from any sort of specialness point of view, but we want it to be something that's helpful, that's healing, not a relationship that's either reinforcing trauma or is traumatizing in its own way or harmful in its own way. And then, as well as keeping an eye on those things, and for those things being important, there's looking at safeguarding potentially, safeguarding if there's suicidal ideation, that is potentially a life or death matter. So how are those things taken care of and kept an eye on? Having some basic knowledge of neuroscience, I think, is helpful. The nervous system, sort of physiology. Not all therapists are going to be doing that, but there's a lot in terms of trauma now, in terms of kind of neuroscience and the nervous system. So I think it's important to have that kind of knowledge. We need knowledge around the sort of psychiatric world, to the extent that that may be some relevant here. We need potentially knowledge of antidepressant medication, anti-anxiety medication, possibly ADHD, ADD, Asperger's. I'm not suggesting that every therapist should be an expert in these things. Of course not, because there are experts in these things. Well, some therapists will be specialists in those things, but we need to be able to know when something is perhaps beyond, as far as expertise, beyond the therapy. So could we need a wider container or somebody else involved, or actually for somebody to be referred on potentially? And how do you do that? As far as endings, that there is walking with people, sort of taking their hand, metaphorically, and being with them through this journey and having enough empathy to really be with them. And so they're seen, heard, felt, and also at all times be ready, willing and able to let go. Sometimes in difficult situations, sometimes when somebody wants to avoid an ending because that's what they've learnt to do, or it's too difficult to have the ending, or there are other times when somebody doesn't really care about an ending. How do you hold all that in mind and work that through in relationship if necessary? And if it's not possible, sometimes people won't end. They don't want to, they don't realise the impact that might have on the therapist, and therefore they just end. So for the therapist, somehow we need to be processing that potentially in relationship with ourselves. We can also do that in relationship with supervisors, with peers. And there are two other things there which can be important and challenging. The first is that there isn't really a right or wrong answer to a lot of these things that happen. If you ask different therapists, they will have different views. Of course, as far as boundaries, there are particular things that 99 out of 100 therapists, or probably even 100 out of 100 therapists would say are not behaviour that should be engaged in, are sort of unacceptable, wrong. But generally, as in most things in relationships, there isn't really a right or wrong answer. That can be very helpful because it means that we talk about things in relationship and deal with them and process them in relationship. Perhaps first outside of the room with a supervisor or peer supervisors, and then ideally to work through it with a client. But as I say, the fact that there isn't right or wrong can lead to anxiety for people. The unknown can have anxiety attached to it. What I vaguely remember from existential therapy is that one of the reasons that we sort of create structures around things, and we need to do this or shoulds and ought tos, is that it reduces anxiety for people. If you're in a situation where there isn't a right answer, where nobody can say you've done the right thing or the wrong thing, you've just done a thing which is then worked through, that can come with anxiety. So there is that that can be challenging and needs to be managed at times. As I say, over time, you really, in my experience, you develop that trust in yourself. You very much develop that trust in clients, also your supervisors and peer supervisors, but that can be a process, and there can be an anxiety along the way, and still sometimes anxiety now. So there's that side of things, is no right or wrong answer, and there's also the confidentiality part of it, of course. I'm not able, well, I could, but it would be in breach of confidentiality to walk out of my room and talk to somebody who's in my house about what's just happened. There's a legal, ethical, moral, and absolutely, as there should be, obligation for confidentiality. But that does mean at times we're going to need to wait until we talk about whatever it is that's happened. Most of the time, as I say in my experience, things go very well in therapy. Sometimes there are difficulties that we're going to need to talk about, and we might need to wait for supervision. We might need to wait to speak to our peer supervisor and not be able to talk about it with other people. So in the meantime, it's sort of being able to regulate ourselves, trust ourselves, and those things can be challenging for people. You then also, in therapy, have those people who are doing particular structured types of therapies like EMDR, cognitive behavioural therapy, dialectical and behavioural therapy, and various others. So as well as all these things around the relationship and looking at them and paying attention to them, there's also more structured work that they need to be doing too. And as I say, this will differ for each person you have in the room. It can differ from person from week to week as well, depending on what's happening in their lives. We might have people who are more cognitive, people who are more in their feeling, other people who think more creatively, others who are very much more in touch with their bodies. So there's being able to establish a relationship with all types of people. It's not possible in every situation, but if you're looking at the sort of challenges, is how do you be able to connect with the cognitive person, perhaps if you're more feeling. If you're more cognitive, how do you connect with the feelers? So it's how do you create these relationships? Of course, they will be doing it too. This is all co-created with people. You work through it in relationship with people, and that's the amazing thing about it, and that's the healing thing about it for people. But how do you relate and help the cognitive people, for example, to feel listened to and heard and understood? And how do you also hold that perhaps their more feeling part needs more energy without it sounding critical, or that they need to be different? It can all be challenging. So those are just some of the examples of things that might be happening within the relationship. As well as that, if you're looking at running a private practice in the way that I do, this therapy practice, the clients are all contained within lots of the administration. So there's note taking that needs to be done. You need to be keeping on top, of course, of monies coming in and out and the different ways that might be happening. And as I say, if there's late payments, that kind of thing, potentially talking about it during sessions too. There is insurance to arrange, data protection rules, all sorts of things practically administratively as well that need to be borne in mind too, which over time you get used to, as with anything, and become second nature really. But certainly during the early stages of work, they're all things to adjust to. Most people don't come into therapy working for themselves and running their own business. Some people are not working, or they work within organisations. And within organisations, those, in my experience, so speaking from that, when I worked within an organisation, it was much more outward in. So the processes are there. Work gets delivered from other people to me. That was the stage that I was at there. Other people kind of decided how things went. But in this situation, as far as running your own business, it's much more inward out. Now that is wonderful, because it means that whatever is created is something that you've done. And that is hugely, in terms of trust of self and also trust of the world, that sort of voice and visibility as well, an amazing thing. It can also mean that everything is down to you, how things progress, how you market things, how you develop your career are all down to you, of course. And what becomes very valuable and important and vital is the connections that you have with other people, often other therapists. But of course, therapists are as different as all human beings are to each other. I mean, there's a basic personality type, but there isn't a sort of standard form therapist. So the way that you might want your career to develop, how you market, how you use social media, what you do with that, how you Whether you're very public on social media, what you show is very much going to be personality dependent on what you're comfortable with. And as I said in relation to the clients, with there being no right or wrong answer necessarily, can be an amount of anxiety, you might feel that, because there's no definitive way to do this. As I say, that's great from the point of view of agency, your own control over your life, self-determination, growth, opportunities, those kind of things. And it can also come with anxiety. When you're running your own business, everything sort of stands or falls with you. Of course, you take advice from people, and which is incredibly helpful. But largely, when I was in an organisation, working within an organisation, whatever I was doing or not doing, that still stood. And other people were making decisions, and other people were helping out. When you work for yourself in private practice, it can be the best of things. It is the best of things for me, but it is also challenging from that point of view. There's nobody else who's going to be held accountable. There's nobody else who is responsible. It's you that's deciding it. And I'm just in private practice, I say just, but of course then there are the people who are employed and everything that comes with that for them as far as the challenges, as well as potentially their private practice. The people that also do training, are in research, spend a lot of time on the media, doing media things, which I also do. They all come with their own challenges as well. So I've said previously about the great thing about the job is that you can do a number of different things and combine a number of different ways of being a therapist, as I say, whether that's on media, social media, in private practice, schools, hospitals, but they do all come with their challenges. Working for yourself at the moment, of course, is particularly challenging. We don't know how, say, cost of living crisis is going to affect anything, but when you're working for yourself, whatever happens is going to have a direct effect on you. When you can be a bit insulated within a company, within an organisation, but if you're working for yourself, there is no insulation. What's going to happen depends on the decisions and the choices that you make, and of course what may happen externally. So lots of challenges about running a private practice. More generally in life, I would say there can be something challenging about the fact, you know, if I want to be in the place, and I would say that's a sort of calm and alive place, I would say that's the best place to be for me. That's just my frame, I suppose, is working with clients. If I'm going to be able to have dual attention on myself and the clients, to sort of be listening to what they're saying, I need to be noticing what I'm feeling in my body around them. I need to be noticing what's happening with them, listening to the content that they provide, sort of reading between the lines on the content. Are they telling a story because they're trying to say something or want to say something about the therapeutic relationship, for example? If I don't want to be triggered, really want to notice what's happening for me and to be in a place where I can respond to it rather than react, for example. I mean, as I say, it doesn't happen often, but it can be very important if it does. It can be very significant if it does. Those places, in order to do that and to manage being in a business, and so managing the fear part, managing the anxiety, so I can get the best of it, the sort of excitement and growth. But I think I need to be in a place, as I say, of calm and alive there, really about the nervous system. There's a little video which I've done on my YouTube channel about calm and alive and what that means. So that can be challenging because everything factors into that. Of course, my practice does, the sorts of clients that I would meet and take on and work with, and also whatever else happens in my life. So the relationships outside of the room, the media that I consume, the people I'm around, the behaviours that I engage in. So there's always that making sure that whatever's happening outside of the room is largely keeping me in a place where I'm able to manage those relationships and my behaviour, etc., in the way that I want to. And of course also a meaning that I can be where I want and need to be within the therapeutic relationship too, and that the clients that I work with, the people that I choose to work with, are more likely for me to maintain that sort of calm and alive place, which is in turn also going to mean that I can also be in a place outside of the room with all the important relationships which are there too, in order to lead the life that I want to. So they both directly affect each other. You know, if I'm tired because of something that's happening outside of the room, that directly impacts on how I am as somebody's therapist. If I was tired as a lawyer when I was tapping through a project agreement, it didn't really matter. I mean, if it was consistently in that place, that would be problematic. But for a couple of hours, it doesn't matter. But when a client sees me, that's the only time that they have therapy a week. I may have a number of clients a day. But it's really important for me, and again, other therapists may see this differently, but to be in a place where I can be the most helpful therapist that I can be. And I think that requires all different parts of life, thoughts, feeling, body, behaviour, to be working together in an alignment to the extent that that's possible. So lots of different ideas, I think, there about how it can be challenging, both within the room with clients and then also running a business. I hope that I haven't given the impression with this that this is one long stressful situation, because that's absolutely not the case. I love what I do because of how, more often than not, I feel doing it. All the challenges that I'm talking about generally are worked through. If you're looking at ones in relation to clients, they're either worked through in supervision, in peer supervision, or of course in relationship with self-reflection, potentially therapy. Some therapists are in therapy as well, and very importantly with the clients themselves. And I would say generally that's hugely building and maintaining of trust in self and also other people, the work that happens with clients particularly. There might be some therapists who say that they get very affected by the sort of traumatic experiences that they hear about. And of course, as an empathetic person, that is going to affect being in relationship with somebody and hearing those stories. But from my point of view, when somebody's come into the room, I think as distressing and difficult as the stories might be, they are somewhere where it can be different now. And it is amazing what human beings can go through and how they cope and their resilience, and also the change that can be made through a therapeutic relationship. Actually, therefore, as challenging as it might be, it's also incredibly life-affirming from my point of view. It is life. I would say it is living, very much living relationships all the time with clients, with friends, with supervisors, and then also it really helps with living and life outside of the room as well. So it's very life affirming, it's very life enriching, working with the people that I work with, and as I say, the other professionals as well. And it's exciting and it's interesting, fascinating at times. But, and I suspect that probably has come through, unlike what that person said, I don't think it's easy. It is challenging. But then I think anything that's really worth something is challenging, is going to be challenging. It is work. So that's as much as I can say timing-wise, really. I could go on for another couple of hours talking about it, things inside the room potentially, the relationship, supervision, working for yourself, all sorts of things. It's really just a kind of a quick summary in some ways, or it might not have felt like that, about what some of the challenges might be. I would love to hear what you think and feel about this. So please do comment below if you're somebody wanting to go into therapy, if you are a client in therapy, if you are a therapist. I would love to know what you think about the things that I've said, but also what you might see as challenges. So as I say, please do comment below. If you want to get in touch about anything, then please do contact me either through the comments or via the website. Please do like the video if you found it helpful or interesting, and please do subscribe to the channel as well for more content. And thank you for listening, and take care.